Our presenter this evening is Chris Kemmerer. Chris has been with the Pennsylvania State Parks for over 15 years. As an avid birder and conservationist, Chris works to bring his love of the outdoors to Pennsylvania residents and visitors. Thank you, Chris. As the Education Interpretation Section Chief, he oversees the educational program for state parks, providing direction, support, and training to field staff who annually educate over 250,000 people. In addition, he promotes state park educational opportunities, develops and fosters ongoing partnerships, represents the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the DCNR, on environmental education panels and working groups, guides development of state park interpretive management plans, and leads various exhibit and non-personal education projects, such as the award-winning exhibits at Hickory Run State Park. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
He's also our former president.
Thank you, Jill. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you all tonight. It's good to be back. So for those of you who, yes, I'm very much here in my capacity as a Pennsylvania State Park employee, but I'm also your newsletter editor. So here's a face to the name. And I have been on the board as well. And I'm going to give an extra plug for those of you who may be on the fence about being on the board or not. I'm going to say absolutely 100% yes, you should do that. I really appreciated and valued my time on the board. So if you're thinking about it, I definitely highly encourage you to do it. So with that said, we're going to talk about Pennsylvania State Parks, and more specifically, we're going to talk birding in Pennsylvania State Parks. So what is it going to look like today? So what are we going to be doing? So I will give you fair warning that when I practiced my presentation this morning, I was rambling on, aka enjoying myself, sharing all the great information, and it took over an hour. So sit back, relax, and sip that wine, Peggy.
I finished it though.
Oh, you need more than I guess. So what we're going to be chatting about today is I'm going to give just a general overview of the state park system in Pennsylvania, give you a sense of kind of the variety of parks that we have. And then we're going to delve into highlighting some of those state parks. So the way I kind of have it divided is we're going to look at parks that are within an hour drive of Harrisburg. A lot of them are about a half an hour. Some of them are kind of right there at about an hour. We're then going to look at parks that I say are a day trip. So these are parks that are about, I don't know, probably about like 2 hours long, about a 2-hour drive away. And then we're going to delve into parks that are very much an overnight trip, right? About a 3 or 4 hour drive. And then we'll chat about some ornithological research projects that we have going on within the system, and then how you can engage with state parks. Just kind of two things that I just kind of want to kind of put up front, and that is a few parks that you may think I would talk about, I'm not going to talk about for specific reasons. So I'm not going to chat about Memorial Lake State Park, mainly because I know you all regularly schedule field trips at Memorial Lake. So you all are fairly familiar with that park. And if you're not, I highly, highly recommend you checking it out. I'm also not going to be talking about Presque Isle because I feel like everyone knows that Presque Isle is an amazing place to be during migration. I think it's the park with the highest species count on eBird. And I really want to highlight other parks that you may not be familiar with. So just to kind of put that into kind of context. So a little bit about your state park system. So there is a Pennsylvania State Park within 25 miles of every resident. We are divided into 66 operational units, and about 64 of them have education staff. 4 of those state parks are considered environmental education centers. That means the primary purpose of that park is to do educational programming. That's kind of their priority, that's their focus. And then recreational resources such as hiking or other recreations are kind of secondary to their individual missions. We have 3 parks that are conservation areas. That simply means that we are limited in the facilities that we're able to build on those parks. So Boyd Big Tree along Fishing Creek, as well as Joseph Iberson outside of Halifax, are two of the three conservation areas that we have. And if you have been there, you know it's literally a parking lot, a pavilion, and some hiking trails. And that's all we're really allowed to do with them because of how we received those lands. We have one historic park. We have 52 lakes that we actively manage. We have over 1,300 miles of trails. All total, we have over 300,000 acres of property that we manage. There are 41 million visits every year. And a visit is if you're an avid birder at a state park, every time you go to that state park, that counts as one of those visits. And we have 124 state parks in the system. It makes us one of the largest state park systems in the country. And we are the largest state park system that has no entrance fee. So it is totally free to enter in and utilize any of your Pennsylvania state parks. So what do those state parks look like? What does that kind of diversity of parks look like? So Cherry Springs State Park is in the northern part of the state in Potter County. It is an international dark sky park. And on a clear night, you can see the Milky Way with your naked eye. Of course, Presque Isle and the 7 miles of sand beach on Lake Erie. And then if you go a little bit further south, out in Western PA is Jennings Environmental Education Center. It is home to what we call a relic prairie. So this is a habitat that used to be much more extensive across Pennsylvania, but now it's only found in really kind of maybe 3 or 4 small pockets in Western PA. But there has species like this blazing star that you traditionally think of as a more Western species in terms of west of the Mississippi River. So that is a unique habitat that we manage. We have a really unique bog habitat at Black Shannon State Park outside of State College. And it's home to our 3 native carnivorous plant species. Then, of course, we have really urban parks as well. So if you are a Pittsburgh sports fan, Steelers or Pirates, you probably well know that fountain at Point. Well, Point State Park is, well, a state park. But we also have some really unique recreations that happen within the system. So almost every park you can go hiking or birding. Most of our parks, you know, you can go kayaking or fishing on. We have some other more unique recreations within the system. So Laurel Ridge State Park is in the Laurel Highlands, the southwest part of the state. It is home to the 72-mile Laurel Highlands backpacking trail. So it starts in the borough of Ohiopyle and goes all the way north to the city of Johnstown. And these are just some of the shelters that are along the trail. Pioneer View State Park, which is outside of Williamsport with amazing views of the Susquehanna, is the only state park that you can hang glide from. We have 2 privately managed golf courses within the system. One is at Evansburg, which is in Montgomery County. The other one is in Caledonia State Park, which is in Franklin. We're home to 4 downhill ski resorts. So they are found at Laurel Mountain, Blue Knob, Big Pocono, and Denton Hill. So they are all privately run, and they all have lots of snow right now, from my understanding. They're all having good seasons. But beyond that too, we're also home to some unique architecture and historical buildings. So 3 of our parks have these very old grand mansions that we manage. Ridley Creek is outside of Media in Chester County. Nolde Forest Environmental Education Center, as well as Kings Gap Environmental Education Center, also have really old, beautiful mansions that we actively manage. And one of the best things to do with an old building is to give it a purpose. That's the best way to kind of conserve it and make sure that it kind of stays active and vital. So at Tyler State Park, which is in Lower Bucks County, coincidentally, that's where I started my Pennsylvania State Park career. It's home to, I think, 11 or 12 historic buildings, the oldest one dating back to 1790. And one of the more unique uses of those buildings is Spring Garden Mill, which is home to Langhorne Players, which is a local theater troupe, and they do a full season of productions every year. And I do believe there's also a playhouse at Caledonia State Park as well. Again, with those historical structures, we have numerous parks that celebrate our iron furnace history. And then, of course, Washington Crossing Historic Park down in Lower Bucks County. So those 5 days when Washington camped out before crossing the Delaware is also a Pennsylvania State Park. And along with all of that, of course, there's the wildlife, right? So the black bear, sometimes they're right there. They know exactly where they need to be, like that elk for cinema honing. This is a snake, so if you don't like snakes, I apologize. This is the endangered Massasauga rattlesnake. It utilizes that relic prairie habitat that Jennings has. So that's where they're kind of restricted and they're endangered. And of course, the reason why you all are all here is to talk about the birds. So that's what we're going to get into for the rest of our presentation. So we're going to dive into, we're going to look at some parks that you can drive to within about an hour of Harrisburg. And I'm just going to give just kind of like a glimpse and overview of the park. Well, you'll get it. We'll get going into it. And I will say that if you all have any questions about anything that I had mentioned about the park system as a whole, or if you have specific questions about the parks that I'm highlighting, feel free to kind of put them into the chat. Or you can wait until the end and ask the questions at the end because there's a ton of time built in for that. So the first park that I wanted to highlight is Cadorus State Park. So Cadorus State Park is way down south in York County outside of Hanover, right along the Maryland state line. I don't know, this is a really picturesque park. I really like the park. It has a relatively large lake, as you can see, is almost 1,300 acres. And what's unique about this, like, it has tons of coves. It has lots of coastline, and that kind of plays into why this is a fairly good birding location. But generally speaking, it's rolling hills, it's farm fields, and there's some mixed forests in there. Cadorus State Park itself is an IBA, and on eBird, it has about over 200 species, about 202, 203 species have been identified at the park. So as you can see, there's tons of coastline in here. So you may be familiar with Cadorus because it is home to three, and the stars kind of represent three nesting pairs of bald eagles. And I think one of them is not necessarily on the park, is just off the park. I believe the Game Commission has the camera that's on that particular nest. But the best vantage point to see the nest is from the park. The other thing that's really kind of fun and unique about Cadorus is that because the lake level fluctuates quite a lot, the dam is actually owned by Gladfelter Paper Company, and they utilize the water for their production of paper in Spring Grove. So because of that, the coves regularly turn into mudflats. So you end up getting lots of interesting shorebirds. So I'm going to talk about Black Rocks, which is this kind of mudflat, kind of like down here in the southeast part of the state. So again, some of the best time to go birding down at Cadorus is late summer, early fall. And in that Black Rocks area, when it's the mudflats, you're going to get a lot of different kinds of shorebirds. They've had greater and lesser yellowlegs. They've had various species of sandpipers and, of course, killdeer. Within the Marianne Furnace area, which is kind of the area just adjacent to that Black Rock Flats area, they get warbling vireos, Nashville, Canada, chestnut-sided, pine, mourning, and a whole host of other warblers. It's been known that they will get, excuse me, I thought I had an extra slide of birds. They will rarely get loons, double-crested cormorants, lots of indigo buntings. I mentioned that they have nesting bald eagles, but they also have nesting osprey as well. So the other thing that I just kind of wanted to mention about Cadorus is that it is one of those parks where, because it's so kind of spread out, you really could kind of spend the day there and hitting like different parts of the park and kind of driving around. So it's not like one of those where like you can just go and maybe do a quick loop and you're done within like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. You could probably spend the full day there hitting up different parts of the park. So definitely one that I'm going to encourage. Another park that I know that we tend to go to for field trips, but it's always for spring wildflowers, but we don't tend to go there for birding field trips. So I wanted to highlight Gifford Pinchot. Gifford Pinchot is about a half an hour away. It's outside of Lewisberry. It's about an average size park, about 2,000 acres. It too has a lake, but it's fairly wooded. What I will say though is that They tried to farm it, but they didn't farm it very well because there's lots of rocks. So that's something to kind of keep in mind with the trails. They're a little rocky. And I have never, ever been to a park or a site where their trails are so wet and so muddy. So if you're going to go birding, wear your muck boots and be prepared for some wet trails. So that's kind of fair warning. So what I will say is that the whole park, I would say, is pretty good birding. But what I have found personally is that this area in the kind of in the southern part of the park, where it's called the Beaver Creek Trail, is the part of the park that I really like the most. One of the reasons for that is because these two day use areas up here tend to get utilized fairly heavily. All these little circles that you can see here are the disc golf course. So there are people playing disc golf if you're trying to utilize some of these trails. And for me personally, that's just too many people. So I like to go and use kind of this area of the park here in that Beaver Creek area. So, but for the most part, the trails are relatively flat. And if you really wanted to, you could go and make an 8-mile loop all the way around the lake if you were so inclined to bird that. So some of the more kind of interesting things that they've seen. So along Quaker Race, which is one of the main day use areas, they regularly get turkeys and yellow-throated vireos. Along that Beaver Creek Trail, they have had common, again, I can never say this, common gallinules. There we go. They've had rails pretty regularly down there. When the last time that I was there, they had buffleheads and hoodies and a whole bunch of other different kind of waterfowl. It's a little swampy, so they get red-shouldered hawks and barred owls and veeries. I got winter wrens there last March. I also got red-headed woodpeckers. They're pretty confident that they actually have breeding red-headed woodpeckers down in that area of the park. So I think, again, that's another great one. That's pretty close. Again, that yellow-throated vireo right there. Sorry, I need to keep up with my slides. The next park that I wanted to highlight is Kings Gap. So Kings Gap is one of our 4 environmental education centers. It's in Cumberland County, right outside of Carlisle. And it is like the majority of the park, probably like over 90% of the park is heavily forested. So when you're looking at the park, this area down here at the kind of the entrance to the park is called the Pine Plantation, mainly because it used to be an old tree farm and eventually went defunct, so all the trees kind of grew up. So, and then this is kind of like this wetland pool area, so they have lots of kind of wetlands in here. So these trails are relatively flat and easy hiking. But you can see that there is a lot of elevation gain happening in here. So it's flatter down here. If you go up to where the mansion area is, it's relatively flat, easy hiking up around here as well. But if you get off into any of the other parts of the park, you're going to be birding. But I think the park describes it as adventurous birding. So take that for what you will. And Kings Gap is also part of the larger South Mountain IBA. And they've had about 146 different bird species identified within the park. So during the winter, if you were to go down to that pine plantation, that area right when you get into the park, you're going to get your white-throated sparrows and your juncos. They have fox sparrows down there, brown creepers and winter wrens, and your typical kind of winter birds that you would expect. And then like hermit thrushes, they have the kinglets. Then if you head up to the mansion area where they have active feeders, because they do Project Feeder Watch as well, you'll get purple finches and grosbeaks and various red-breasted and white-breasted nuthatches. They do tend to get both species of chickadees, early pine warblers, and if you know there are pine siskins, they're going to be there as well. That lawn area up near the mansion is fairly decent on migration days. They'll get maybe like 6 to 10 different warbler species. They'll get rose-breasted grosbeaks. I pretty regularly get indigo buntings when I'm up there as well. They've had olive-sided flycatchers. So interesting things. Again, it's a very heavily forested park. So that's kind of why, you know, you're really gosh, I always think I have one more slide of birds. The other thing that I kind of wanted to mention as well is that if you use some of the more adventurous trails, they do have American woodcock. They've had Spanish thrush and gray cheek thrush at the park, red crossbills and prairie warblers as well. And then, of course, they have a lot of what you would think of as your traditional kind of like forest interior species as well. So scarlet tanagers, ovenbirds. They have breeding Kentucky warblers. So lots of interesting things to see at Kings Gap, but definitely probably a bit more of a hike, a little bit more adventurous. Then one of our three newest state parks is Susquehanna Riverlands. I will confess that I have not been to the park yet, so I had to rely on the good graces of our environmental educator down there for the details. So it's about 1,200 acres. It is about half of it is about a mixed forest. So some of it is mature woods, but it too is kind of that pole forest. So it used to be a tree farm and they let it grow up. So you have these kind of stands of pine trees. There is quite a few agricultural fields that have gone fallow. And eventually we are going to be turning them into native grasslands. So hopefully in the next few years, in the coming years, we'll be getting more grassland species happening at the park as well. But there are also cliffs and floodplains that overlook the Susquehanna. So this park is on the York side of the Schuylkill River, just north of Wrightsville and Columbia, to kind of give you a sense kind of where it's at. So the other thing that I will say too is what the park has noticed is that they get a lot of gulls along the river, but their waterfowl diversity actually tend to see more interesting things along the Codorus Creek. So kind of keep that in mind if you want to go down. So far, they only have 116 bird species identified on eBird. But I think part of that is because prior to us owning it and being a state park, I believe it was a limited access property. So I don't think they had a lot of people that were really kind of going on there. So I have a feeling there's probably a lot more birds that are coming and utilizing the park than what we kind of realize. So some of the bird species that they have seen over the last 2 years that we've had it, scarlet tanagers, orchard orioles. They have a really large flock of wild turkey. I've heard that they get a lot of fish crows, which makes sense because the river is right there. For gulls, they get ring-billed Bonapartes and they get American herring gulls along the river. They've had ravens, eagles, great egrets, kingfishers. They have common mergansers, double-crested cormorants. So the more kind of common species, but again, kind of you have like the river habitat and the creek. And again, it's within about a half an hour drive, and it's one of our newest state parks. So I definitely think it's worth checking out. And for the most part, it's pretty flat to out to the cliffs. And then the next state park that I wanted to highlight is kind of the sister park to Memorial Lake, and that's Swiderra State Park. I will say that I just went to Swiderra State Park for the first time on my own, I think back in May for spring migration, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was a great day. I ended up going back 5 times between then and the end of June to go birding because I had such a good time. So the park is actually fairly big. It's about 3,500 acres. For the most part, it's forested, but there are some fields and shrublands. And probably the main characteristic of the park is that it has 10 miles of the Swiderra Creek that kind of runs right through it. And then along with that, they have the Swiderra Creek Rail Trail. So hiking here, because of it kind of essentially being in the valley, is really flat and really easy. So I did most of my birding in this kind of trout run trailhead mountain bike complex area. I didn't use any of these trails. I parked down here where their parking lot is, and I immediately hit the rail trail. I did do some other birding like up through the middle of the park, but for whatever reason, I found this to be perfectly exciting, and I was finding lots of really good stuff. So there are 106 63 bird species that have been identified on eBird. The park itself, I'm going to go back a slide. The park itself is not an IBA. However, it's sandwiched between two. So you have St. Anthony's Wilderness IBA right here, and then you have the Kittatinny Ridge IBA right here, and it's kind of sandwiched like right in between. So I think that's kind of lends to like some of the birds that you're going to be seeing. So I got my first severe great crested flycatcher there, as well as my first severe common yellow throat. The amount of indigo buntings that I saw at this park was unreal. Like, I don't know, like every like 200 feet, I got another pair. It felt like they were everywhere. It was amazing. Lots of gnatcatchers. They have breeding populations of Kentucky warbler. They have a breeding pair, at least, of worm-eating warblers. It took me 3 times of visiting before I actually saw the worm-eating warbler. Every time I heard him, stepped out of my car right there above the parking lot, just singing away, doing its thing. But yeah, 3 times it took me to actually get eyes on them. So I heard cuckoos when I was there, and just like a whole host of other birds. And I would imagine too in the wintertime, because of how wide the Swedera is there, you can probably get some decent waterfowl on the creek as well, but I haven't birded it in the spring yet. So those were the local parks that I wanted to highlight. There, of course, there's Little Buffalo, Boyd Big Tree, Iverson Conservation Area, and of course Memorial Lake are all parks that are within an hour drive of Harrisburg, and they're all worth checking out. But those were the ones that I wanted to highlight. So with that, we're going to delve into day trips. So these are parks that are about a 2-hour drive or less away. So you could certainly make this an overnight if you're inclined, but you can also do it in a day if you want to as well. So the first park that I wanted to highlight is Bald Eagle State Park. It's a relatively large park at almost 6,000 acres. It does have a very large lake as well, and it has a really nice mix of habitats. So, you can kind of see here pretty well how the mountainside here is fairly forested. You kind of have this like savanna, shrubland kind of habitat. They have a fair bit of wetlands. And I would say that that's pretty, this is pretty much what you're going to see throughout most of the park. It's just outside of State College. And it's a bit of a long kind of park here. So I'm going to be talking about this Hunter Run Cove, which is really good for waterfowl. The primitive campground over here is kind of much more wooded. So you're getting more of your kind of forest species. Down through here in this upper and lower Greens Run area, this is more of your shrubland habitat, but you also get good waterfowl kind of down here in the cove as well. So it itself is an IBA, and of the parks that I'm highlighting today, it has the highest species count on eBird at 277 different bird species that have been identified at the park. So they have lots of kind of good stuff. So they've kind of divided it up into their super rare sightings. So they've had American bittern and least bittern. They've had marbled godwit, greater white-fronted goose, white pelicans, whimbrels. They've also had black-legged kittiwakes. I also make it to Bald Eagle fairly regularly for work. So I'm not necessarily going there to bird. I'm going there because I have to be there for work, and then I go birding because why not? And let's see, the one time I was there, I saw a northern shrike because one shows up about every other year, every 3 years. I was there for a training in the end of April this past year, and there was a Caspian tern on the lake. So you just never know what you're going to see at the park. So again, with those northern shrikes, they notice that they tend to get them every other year or so. Of course, they get northern harriers, merlins, kestrels. They'll get long-tailed ducks. They get snow geese as well. Your various species of owls, great blue herons, great green herons, and the like. And then, real kind of common species. They get all 3 different species of mergansers on the lake, killdeer, Baltimore and orchard orioles, red-winged blackbirds. We also get a lot of different species. They get tree swallows, barn swallows, rough-winged swallows. They get quite a few swallows there as well. And they also have, I think, 2 pair of nesting bald eagles at the park as well. The other nice thing about bald eagle is that it does have the bald eagle Nature Inn, which is a 16-room hotel. Very, very nice. So if you do want to make it more of a trip and kind of have that be a launching pad into like the northern part of the state, you know, maybe to go see Cherry Springs, it's a great place to go. Another good park to check out is Beltsville State Park. So this is just a day-use state park up near the Poconos, out near Jim Thorpe. I will say this is the park that I grew up with. So this is the park that I fell in love with state parks by going to. So it's about 3,000 acres, has a really relatively large lake, about 940 acres. It's mostly forested. It has some wetlands and it has some fields as well. So when you're looking at the lake, so some of the best areas to bird is kind of this day use area and this area up here near the breast of the dam. So for waterfowl, they typically get waterfowl up through here in the breast of the dam and then back through this area here, which is the Pine Run boat launch. This is owned by the park, but it's managed by the Game Commission. And this is a lot of that kind of shrubland, grassland kind of habitat. And then the rest through here is pretty forested. The trail system is not extensive, but for the most part, it's pretty flat and relatively easy. So some of the species that they will get at the park. So again, so it's excellent for waterfowl. I think just this within the last like 3 weeks, they've had surf scooters I saw and long-tailed ducks at the park within the last 2 or 3 weeks. So they get greater and lesser scaup. They get red-headed ducks, red-throated loons, redneck grebes, and they have a host of lots of breeding species as well. So confirmed, they have breeding yellow warblers, common yellowthroats, American redstarts, black and white warblers, prairie warblers, black-throated green warblers, and northern parulas, and they have had all 3 species of scoter on the lake. So it is an excellent park to check out, particularly if you're kind of already, you know, going up to the Poconos, whether you're going to Jim Thorpe or some other area up there. It is definitely worth a visit. The next park that I wanted to highlight is French Creek State Park. It's out near Reading. It's about an hour drive. It's a relatively large state park in a very suburban area of Pennsylvania. The park itself is an IBA, and they've had about 195 species that they've identified on eBird. So the park is heavily forested. They actually kind of between all this public land, it's like the largest contiguous piece of forest between New York and DC, is what they say. But one of the more unique things about the park is this, it's very kind of counterintuitive, but this area of the park is kind of cut off. It's like way up here. It's called the Hopewell Big Woods section of the park, but this is actually all beautiful, beautiful grassland habitat. And this trail just gives you amazing views of the Schuylkill River as well. So the 2 kind of best areas to kind of really bird in the park, again, is this kind of Hopewell Big Woods area, which is kind of this grassland habitat. But then also this area right here where it says Sixpenny Trail, through this kind of trail system up here are some of the 2 best places to really go in the park. And then of course they do get waterfowl at their 2 small lakes. So in that Sixpenny Woods Trail area, they regularly get ovenbirds, hooded warblers, worm-eating warblers, wood thrush, Louisiana water thrush, eastern kingbirds. They get great crested flycatchers and common nighthawks. If you're moving now to that grassland area, they get prairie warblers, blue grosbeaks, yellow-breasted chats. They get grasshopper sparrows, northern harriers, blue-winged warblers, American woodcock, and common yellowthroat. And yeah, it's an easy drive. Like from my house to the park office is like almost exactly an hour to the dot. And there's just a lot to explore. And like I said, that Hopewell Boogswood area, that grassland area is really, it's really something to see. It's really quite incredible. I went in March, so I did not see any grassland birds, but it was still a very, very nice day out. Then the next park that I wanted to highlight is Marsh Creek State Park. It's right down the turnpike off the Exton exit. It's not really big, but it's a decent sized park, about 1,800 acres, about 500-acre lake. But for being a relatively small park, they have a relatively high species count. They've had 247 different species identified on eBird. So if you're going in the winter, you're definitely going to expect to see a lot of waterfowl on the lake, right? So they regularly get green-winged teal, or the 3 species of mergansers. They've had tundra swans, buffleheads, various species of loon. Oftentimes the loons too, they've noticed, will stay through into the spring, and ringneck ducks. Year round, you're looking at the typicals like great blue herons, double-crested cormorants, green herons, bald eagles, wood ducks, various species of hawks. They have a very active woodcock population. They get a lot of different warbler species, and they are known to have a very feisty group of black vultures that were they're feisty in the sense that I think for 3 summers in a row, we had lots of complaints from visitors because the black vultures would peck at the plastic on their cars. So if you're parking by the pool, you had to watch out for the black vultures because they were feisty. The next park that I wanted to highlight is Nescopec. So I really like Nescopec. It's a park that I tend to get to a lot for work, and therefore I tend to bird it quite often. So what this picture, I will say, essentially epitomizes the park. So along the main road, they have all these parking lots that you can kind of easily pull off onto. And essentially a lot of it looks like what used to be old agricultural fields taken over by autumn olive, and now they're going back into more of a native grassland. And then you move back to a lot of forest, you get Nescopec Creek, and then you get the mountain. And that is pretty much the park. So all along here is the grassland, and then it's forested, and then you have the mountain. Of the trails, like on the south side of Honey Hole Road, are flat and easy walking and hiking. This is the most challenging hiking in the park, but I just kind of stick to here. So the park itself has had about 183 bird species found on Lake Francis, at the park. Lake Francis, which it's called a lake, but it's a pond. They get osprey, yellow warblers. They really get least flycatchers. They've had woodcock calling up near the park office. Through this area, which is kind of a shrubbier area, they've been getting a whippoorwills calling as well. Some of the more interesting migrants that they spotted this past spring were mourning warblers, common night hawks, Wilson's warblers, and olive-sided flycatchers. But I think overall, it's, again, just a really pleasant park to bird because it's pretty easy and accessible. It's kind of right off like 81 and 80 near Whitehaven. So it's an easy drive. It's a good park. I like it. Oh yeah, I need to start showing you bird pictures because that's what you're really hearing, right? See bird pictures. And then Ricketts Glen is really kind of pushing what a day trip could be. I think this might be like 2 hours and 10 minutes to get there, but it's a beautiful drive and I think it's worth it. So Ricketts Glen sits within a larger IBA. It has about 178 species on eBird. And the best time is really spring through mid-July. For the most part, the park is pretty heavily forested. But what's unique about Ricketts Glen, is because of the altitude of the park and how far north it is, the makeup of the forest is much more of like what you would think of as more of, not exactly like a boreal forest, but much more of a northern forest. So you're going to be getting species that you may associate more regularly, say with like the Adirondacks or like northern New England, because of the elevation and kind of where it's at. And you get a lot of forest interior species as well. So that's kind of what makes it different than, say, French Creek or Kings Gap, that are heavily forested parks, but they're too far south and their elevation's not, it's a lot closer to sea level. So there's a lot of difference in that forest habitat up at Ricketts Glen than what we would have here at our more local parks. So they have, some of these birds I've been, saying again and again, but yellow-bellied sapsuckers, pileated woodpeckers. They regularly get alder flycatchers, Acadian flycatchers, blue-headed vireos, red-eyed vireos, red-breasted nuthatch, winter wrens. They get northern water thrush. They get hermit and wood thrush as well, a bunch of veeries. As I mentioned, they get a lot more of like northern species, but they also get magnolia warblers, black-throated blues, black-throated greens, black and white, Blackburnian, chestnut-sided, Louisiana water thrush, common yellow throats. So so it's one of those things where people think about Ricketts Glen simply for the waterfalls, but it's actually a really nice birding location. So, and it's a beautiful drive, and it's about 2 hours away. So that's one that I highly recommend. And now we're going to go and delve into those that is definitely going to be an overnight, a 3-hour drive or more. So we're going to talk about Pymatuning. So Pymatuning is a big park. It is, our side of the park is 17,000 acres about, but the total, you'll see, it's dominated by this huge reservoir, lots of wetlands, and then a little bit of forest. So Pymatuning sits right there on the border between Ohio and Pennsylvania. So this lake is massive. It's not as big as Racetown, but I think it's our second biggest lake outside of Racetown. This area right here is all managed by the Game Commission, so it's a propagation area. So Pymatuning itself is an IBA. It has 224 species on eBird, and the best time to bird it is March through May. Obviously, the lake right now is frozen over, so you're not going to get a lot of waterfowl. But once things start to kind of melt in March, you start to get a lot of movement through for migration. And again, that main habitat is really that reservoir. So you're really going there for a lot more of your water birds. So birds that they regularly see at the park are, common loons, long-tailed ducks, snipe, Wilson's warbler, greater and lesser yellowlegs. They get all 3 species of mergansers. They get red-headed woodpeckers and a whole host of other things. Some of the rarities that they get through, they get surf scoters. They've had white pelicans as well, horned grebes. And they have been noticing that they are now more regularly getting prothonotary and bay-breasted warblers. What I would say is that if you are making a trek and driving 5 hours up to Erie to visit Presque Isle in the spring for spring migration, what I would suggest is that you go and you take a little bit of a detour and you do Pymatuning first. Pymatuning is about a 45-minute drive south of Erie, so you're still in that neck of the woods, and it's really kind of worth checking it out. It is a pretty unique park, and then you can just kind of check it out. So do that when you go and visit Presque Isle. Heading back to the central part of the state is Cinnamahoning State Park. It's a long, skinny park with a skinny lake. It's mostly forested. There are some wetlands. And again, it has that stream. It exists within an IBA. You can see that it's like in a very heavily forested forest valley. Has 193 species on eBird. Again, spring and fall migration are the best to get there. One, because right now I can only imagine how much snow they have, so getting there is a bit of a challenge. But yeah, it really is a beautiful park. So some of the more common birds that they have, they get common and hooded mergansers again, long-tailed ducks. They regularly have golden eagles that are documented as overwintering at the park. So that is pretty exciting. They have merlins and red crossbilled that are documented as breeding in the park as well. Blackburnian, black-throated green, and yellow warblers all breed in the park as well. The other nice thing about Cinemahoning is that it has our wildlife center, so it's a really great way to kind of learn about the wildlife that we have within Pennsylvania, but it's also a nice gateway to the PA Wilds region. And again, like if I can kind of give you a trip, I would say if you stay at the Bald Eagle Nature End, Cinemahoning is about a 45-minute hour drive away. And then at the same time, within your big loop, you can stop and go to the Elk Country Visitor Center and check out the elk herd. So, you know, I'm also your tour guide. And then the last park that I wanted to highlight is Yellow Creek State Park, which is probably a park that you may have never heard of before. So Yellow Creek State Park is out in Indiana County. The park itself is an IBA and it has 276 documented species on eBird. But it's not a particularly big park, right? It's about 3,000 acres. It has that 720-acre lake, but it has a really nice mix of various habitat types. Right, so it has forest, it has that kind of shrubby habitat, lots of good edge habitat, and the park too does get seasonal mudflats, so they can get interesting shorebirds. And this cove back here is kind of the cove that kind of really becomes the best mudflats when that does tend to happen. So again, that best time to bird this particular park is late February through May. So again, once that lake starts to thaw out, you're getting migrating waterfowl, and then of course through migration as some of the best times to kind of go ahead and see that. So again, some of the more interesting bird species that they've had at the park are greater white-fronted goose. They have brant. They've had cackling goose, trumpeter swans. They have had red-necked and eared grebes. They've had sandhill cranes. They've had American offset, piping plovers. With those mudflats, they've had whimbrels, Hudsonian godwits, red knots, buff-breasted sandpipers, all three species of phalarope. They also get quite a few gulls. They've had sabines, little, laughing, and franklin gulls, as well as black terns, leeches, storm pestrels. Yep. Petrels, that is a weird name. There you go. Glassy white ibis. They've had Mississippi kites, all kinds of things. Red and white winged crossbills. And they've had 35 different warbler species documented in the park. So this is it's outside of Indiana, so it's definitely an overnight trip, but I think it is it's worthwhile. It's a very nice park. They do have cabins, so you can always kind of camp there if you want to. And it's a nice jumping off point to other places. So those were the parks that I wanted to highlight. It was really hard to do all 124, so I had to narrow it down somehow, so that's what I did. So, but with all of this, we also have some interesting ornithological research happening in the parks. So these are 3 long-term research projects. Some of these we probably even talked about at a previous Appalachian Audubon meeting. So many of you are probably familiar with the Nesmith Center for Nature and Arts Northern Saw-Whet Owl banding project that's been going on since 1998. Kings Gap Environmental Education Center is one of the 3 current study sites for that research project. Many of you are probably familiar with Dr. Robert Curry out of Villanova. He has been doing research on chickadee hybridization for the last 20 years. And he's really documented how that hybridization zone has moved further north and west, within Pennsylvania. And every few years, he needs to move his study sites. And every time he moves study sites, he always tends to find a state park to be one of his study sites. So when he first started, he was doing research at Nolde Forest, which is out near Reading. And then eventually he started doing research at Tuscarora and Locust Lake, which is in Schuylkill County. And I believe now he is up to Hickory Run, which is just north of Jim Thorpe in the Poconos, doing that research, as well as many other sites. And then the Piping Plover Project is a long-term research project to encourage nesting piping plovers at Presque Isle. But some of the other research projects that we have going on, we have a house wren behavior project happening at Lackawanna, and they're really just looking into the differences and similarities between male and female house wrens. And then at Nescopec, they're doing a research project on veeries to determine what their nesting substrate preference is. So going into it, they assumed that the veeries would prefer native substrates as opposed to, say, autumn olive, which is an invasive species. And what they found was the exact opposite. The veeries actually liked those invasive species better. They actually had more nests, and the nests were more productive than the ones that were happening in the native habitats. So that is causing us to think about how we're going to manage those lands. So I think probably what will happen is we may not be quite as aggressive with trying to turn over some of that, what we thought was disturbed land because of all the autumn olive. We may actually leave some of it there because the research is showing that the veeries are actually kind of preferring that for nesting. Some of the other newer projects that we have going on, we just, the bird banding that's happening at French Creek is through a college, a university program, and they're just kind of going in there and generally kind of banding birds. Big Elk Creek is one of our 3 new parks, and they're doing a grassland bird survey, which is going to kind of feed into the master planning at that park. And then the acoustic bird monitoring is happening because we are, and this could be a whole separate program for you guys, we are undertaking a huge management initiative called dynamic forest restoration. So most of our forests in Pennsylvania are about 100 years old. And that is not a sign of a healthy forest. You want a mixed age forest for it to be a healthy forest, right? So you want young trees, like 20-year-old trees, but you also want those 100-year-old trees, and you also want old growth as well. And a lot of the research has shown that even though those traditional species that we may think of as being forest interior species, while they may need that type of habitat to nest, once the nestlings fledge, they need like shrub or young forest or edge habitat to, to do that initial hunting and to kind of grow and to kind of get up to weight so that they can migrate. So we're going in and we're actively making diverse age class forests within some of our parks. And we're going out and we're listening for what bird species we're hearing in those treated areas. And one of the target species that we're listening for is golden wing warblers. And we're kind of doing, so they're essentially using what birds they're hearing in the treated areas as a proxy for how successful we're being with that management practice. So those are some of the research projects that we have going on with birds across the system. So I hope I got you excited enough that you want to go to state parks. So here are some ways that you can engage with us. So the first thing is just come visit. Like I said, we're free. So any day of the year, we're open and you can kind of go hiking, go birding and check stuff out. So this is our new website. I can throw it in the chat after we're done if you want. But you can go and visit any one of those 124 state parks. Maybe try to set a goal and do all 124. And if you decide that you like visiting us, you might as well just come to an educational program. Essentially, you did one today because you got me here talking about things, but I encourage you to head to a park and go to an educational program at a park. We got a lot of parks near Harrisburg that have full-time staff and do educational programming year-round. Kings Gap has full-time staff, Little Buffalo, Gifford Pinchot, and Codorus, and Susquehanna Riverlands, and Sam Lewis all have full-time staff, so they do year-round programming. And Memorial Lake and Sweetera, they have seasonal staff, so they do programming March through November. So I highly encourage you to do an educational program. That right there is our calendar of events. And so if you decide that you do want to go to Presque Isle, Pine Tuning, you can still check there to see what kind of cool stuff they have going on. And if at that point you're like, man, I really, really love state parks, you can volunteer with us if you want to. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do that. Our conservation volunteers are folks that tend to help, with our garden areas. They tend to help with trail maintenance and other things. Many of our parks have friends groups. They do a lot more. They do larger restoration projects for us. Many of them do a lot of fundraising for us. They also host much larger events that draw in thousands of people into our parks. We also have campground hosts, so you can live at a camp, at a park, camp for weeks on end, and basically be the host for the park and welcome everybody. And then we have our cavity nesting trail program. And most of the parks around Harrisburg have a cavity nesting trail program. So you get a certain number of boxes and you can go and monitor those every week throughout the breeding season to see how our bluebirds and chickadees and tree swallows and all of our various cavity nesting birds are doing. And with that whirlwind of an hour, I talked very fast, I apologize. That is my presentation for you. So if you all have any questions, I would love to answer them because I love talking about state parks. But I just want to say that the vast majority of the bird pictures that you saw today were actually taken by Tony DeSantis. He's our full-time educator at the Lackawanna State Park near Scranton. All of those landscape photos were photos that various state park employees have taken over the years. And otherwise, those photos were notated if I got them somewhere else. Again, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Again, I'm willing to take questions, but at the same time, maybe that question is going to pop into your head tomorrow or over the weekend. And in that case, you can still ask me that question by sending me an email, and that's my email address right there. So thank you all very, very much.